You don't like conflict. But you also don't like who you become after avoiding it. You take pride in being the calm one in the room. But forced calm is control. And constant control is exhausting. There's a part of you that's already irritated. Not at them, at the performance. You don't want to be difficult, but you're starting to notice that being too easy comes at a cost. And the cost stays invisible until it turns into resentment. Maybe you're not evolving. Maybe you're disappearing politely. Stay if that wasn't comfortable. There is a version of you that moves through rooms effortlessly. It knows what to say. It knows when to smile. It knows when to soften its voice. It learned quickly what pleases, what irritates, what keeps people close, what makes them withdraw. You call it maturity. You call it emotional intelligence. You call it knowing how to deal with people. But something else has been happening quietly. You started adjusting before you even noticed, shrinking certain opinions, delaying certain reactions, laughing at things that did not feel funny, nodding when your body was tightening. It did not feel like betrayal. It felt like survival, and survival gets rewarded. You became the easy one, the reasonable one, the strong one, the one who understands, the one who does not cause trouble. People like that version of you. They trust it. They depend on it. They feel safe around it. But there is a subtle cost to being safe for everyone else. You leave conversations tired without knowing why. You replay interactions in your head. You feel relief when you are finally alone. And sometimes, in very quiet moments, a strange question surfaces. If I remove everyone around me, who is left? Not the role, not the tone you use at work, not the softened version at home, not the agreeable version with friends. You adapted so well that you stopped noticing the adjustments. The way your posture shifts depending on who walks into the room, the way your humor changes, the way your boundaries blur. At some point, adaptation stopped being strategy. It became identity. And here is the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the you living your life is not you. And if that thought makes your chest tighten a little, good. Because this is where the split begins. Carl Jung once wrote that the persona is the mask we wear to meet the world. Not because we are fake, but because we are social. The mask helps us function. It helps us belong. It helps us avoid unnecessary friction. The problem is not having a mask. The problem is forgetting that it is one. You were not born performing. You learned. You learned that certain emotions made adults uncomfortable. You learned that certain traits were too much, too intense, too sensitive, too opinionated, too ambitious, too emotional. So you edited. Maybe it started small, lowering your voice when you were excited, holding back tears because it wasn't a big deal, laughing when someone made a joke at your expense, apologizing for taking space. Each adjustment was subtle, reasonable, understandable. And each one was reinforced. People smiled more, conflicts decreased. You were praised for being mature, for being calm, for being easy. But here is the part no one explains. When you consistently suppress parts of yourself to maintain connection, your nervous system learns a dangerous equation. Belonging equals self-reduction. And once that equation settles in, you stop asking whether you agree. You start asking what will keep the atmosphere stable. You enter a room and immediately scan it. Who needs reassurance? Who might get offended? Who expects something from me? Your body adjusts before your mind catches up. At work, you are composed. At home, you are accommodating. With friends, you are entertaining. In conflict, you are the mediator. But when was the last time you were simply you? Not strategic, not softened, not filtered, just you. Jung warned that what we disown does not disappear. It waits. And the more attached you become to the role, the more terrifying it feels to step outside of it. Because if you are not the calm one, the strong one, the understanding one, who are you? The split is not dramatic. It is quiet. You do not wake up one day feeling lost. You wake up efficient, reliable, functional, and slightly disconnected. Disappearing does not feel like loss at first. It feels like control. When you reduce yourself, things run smoother. Fewer arguments, less rejection, less risk. You become predictable, and predictability feels safe. There is a hidden reward in self-erasure. You avoid being misunderstood. You avoid being called selfish. You avoid the tension that comes when you say, "No, that doesn't work for me." So you adapt faster. Someone dominates the conversation. You shrink your opinion. Someone gets upset. You swallow your frustration. Someone praises you for being patient. You reinforce the role. And the environment responds positively. That is the trap. Because the world rewards the version of you that causes the least disruption. You get invited, you get trusted, you get labeled as stable. But what no one sees is what happens internally. You start feeling irritated by small things. Not because they are big, but because they accumulate. You say yes when you mean no. You agree when you disagree. You comfort when you are exhausted. And later, alone, you feel a strange resentment. Not always toward others, sometimes toward yourself, for not speaking, for not setting a boundary, for not interrupting, for not saying, "Actually, I see it differently." But the next day you repeat the pattern, because the alternative feels dangerous. What if they think you are difficult? What if they withdraw? What if they stop needing you? So you keep performing usefulness. You become the emotional regulator in relationships, the stabilizer in chaos, the responsible one. And people rely on you for that, which makes it even harder to stop, because if you change, you do not just disrupt your image, you disrupt their comfort. And somewhere deep inside, you learned that other people's comfort is more important than your authenticity. That lesson did not arrive in a dramatic speech. It arrived in subtle corrections, raised eyebrows, silent treatments, praise for being the mature one. So you adapted. And the more you adapted, the more invisible certain parts of you became. The angry part, the selfish part, the ambitious part, the part that wants more, the part that wants to leave, the part that wants to confront. They did not disappear, they went underground. And underground things do not die. They grow in the dark. What grows in the dark does not stay quiet forever. At first it leaks, a sharp tone that surprises even you. A sudden withdrawal from someone you once cared about. An unexpected attraction to people who are the opposite of your controlled image. You tell yourself you are just tired, but it is deeper than fatigue, it is fragmentation. When you consistently suppress traits to maintain approval, those traits do not dissolve, they detach. And detached parts seek expression. This is why you sometimes overreact in situations that seem small. Why certain comments feel disproportionately painful. Why you feel exposed when someone describes you in a way that does not match your internal experience. You're so calm. And something inside you thinks, if only you knew. You're always so strong. And part of you feels almost offended, because strength has become a cage. The cost of being the stable one is that no one checks if you are collapsing internally. The cost of being the understanding one is that no one asks what you need. The cost of being the easy one is that your resistance never gets airtime. And slowly, a strange emptiness begins to form. Your life looks functional. You meet expectations. You maintain relationships. You avoid major conflict. But in quiet moments, there is a hollow sensation. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just flat. You scroll longer. You distract faster. You feel restless without knowing what is missing. Because what is missing is not achievement, it is alignment. You are living but not from your center. You are responding but not initiating. You are adjusting but not choosing. And here is where the sentence returns. Maybe the you living your life is not you. Maybe it is a well-constructed character designed to maintain connection at all costs. And the more convincing the character becomes, the further you drift from the parts of yourself that feel inconvenient. The problem is not that you adapted. The problem is that adaptation became permanent. And permanence, when built on suppression, always demands payment. You are paying in subtle ways, through low-grade resentment, through chronic fatigue, through relational patterns that feel familiar and disappointing. And still, on the surface, everything looks fine, which makes it harder to justify the discomfort, harder to explain, harder to confront. So you keep going, efficient, reliable, functional, and increasingly absent. Absence does not mean inactivity. What you pushed down is not passive. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Not the evil part, not the monstrous part, the rejected part. The traits you decided were unacceptable, the impulses you labeled as dangerous, the needs you were taught to minimize. The shadow does not disappear just because you ignore it. It adapts. If you silence your anger, it becomes sarcasm. If you suppress your ambition, it turns into envy. If you deny your need for space, it becomes sudden withdrawal. If you hide your desire for recognition, it shows up as resentment toward those who receive it. You may pride yourself on being composed, but then you feel irrational irritation towards someone who speaks freely. You may see yourself as selfless, but you feel unexplained jealousy towards someone who chooses themselves without apology. You may think you are above conflict, but you repeatedly attract partners who are confrontational, dominant, or emotionally volatile. The shadow is not random. It is strategic. It looks for expression through your blind spots. And the more you insist, "That's not me," the more likely it is acting behind your back. Have you noticed how you sometimes react in ways that do not match your self-image? You snap, you withdraw, you sabotage something that was going well, and afterward you feel confused. That wasn't like me. But maybe it was. Maybe it was the part of you that never got permission to exist openly, the part that got buried under politeness, under reasonableness, under emotional control. Jung warned that what is not made conscious will be lived as fate. Read that again. What is not made conscious will be lived as fate, so you call it bad luck. You call it attracting the wrong people. You call it, "That's just how relationships go." But patterns are not accidents. They are repetitions of what remains unresolved. If you constantly play the accommodating one, you will unconsciously attract those who need accommodation. If you constantly minimize your needs, you will repeatedly find yourself with people who overlook them. Your shadow collaborates with your persona. One performs, the other waits. And when the tension between them grows too large, it erupts. Sometimes as burnout, sometimes as a sudden life change, sometimes as an affair, sometimes as an abrupt ending that shocks everyone, including you. Because from the outside, you were the stable one. From the inside, pressure was building. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants integration. But integration requires something you have been avoiding. Admitting that you are not only the calm one, not only the strong one, not only the understanding one. You are also angry, selfish, hungry, ambitious, impatient, needy, desiring, human. And that is precisely what you learn to hide. Integration sounds noble in theory. In practice, it destabilizes the ecosystem around you. The moment you stop over-accommodating, someone notices, not loudly, subtly. You take longer to respond to a message. They ask if something is wrong. You say you disagree in a meeting. The room goes quiet for half a second too long. You decline an invitation without over-explaining. The tone shifts. When you stop performing your usual emotional labor, the system recalibrates. Because people adapted to your adaptation. If you were the listener, someone else became the talker. If you were the mediator, someone else avoided responsibility. If you were the strong one, someone else leaned harder. Your identity has been functional inside a relational contract, and contracts resist renegotiation. The first time you set a boundary calmly, you may hear, "You've changed." It won't sound like praise. It will sound like suspicion, or disappointment, or confusion. What they often mean is, "You are no longer predictable in the way that benefits me." This is the part no one romanticizes. Growth is not universally welcomed, especially when your growth removes a comfort others depended on. You might feel accused of being distant, self-centered, too sensitive, too serious. You might even question yourself. Was I better before? Better for whom? Notice the shift. For years, your worth was reinforced by how useful you were, how stable, how accommodating. Now, as you reclaim suppressed parts, friction increases. Not because you are wrong, but because equilibrium is breaking, and your nervous system will interpret that friction as danger. The old equation returns. Belonging equals self-reduction. So when tension rises, you feel the impulse to shrink again. To clarify, to soften, to reassure, to say, No, no, I'm still the same. But you are not. And that is precisely the point. Integration is not loud. It is steady. You speak when you disagree. You pause before agreeing automatically. You allow silence instead of filling it to ease others. And the room adjusts slowly. Some relationships deepen. Some become strained. Some quietly fade. Because not everyone was connected to you. Some were connected to the role. And when the role loosens, so does the attachment. This is where many people retreat, not because they lack insight, but because they underestimate the social cost of authenticity. It is easier to disappear again, to be the reliable one, the flexible one, the unproblematic one. But now you know what that costs. And once you see the cost, pretending becomes heavier than conflict. There is a moment in this process where the discomfort sharpens. It is no longer vague. It is no longer just fatigue. It becomes clarity. You begin to see how much of your life has been organized around preventing rejection. Not pursuing truth, preventing rejection. Those are not the same thing. You replay conversations and notice how often you edited yourself mid-sentence. How often you softened a strong opinion. How often you disguised desire as indifference. How often you pretended something didn't matter that much. It mattered. You just learned that expressing it carried risk. Carl Jung warned about this split in a way that feels almost surgical. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Read that slowly. The privilege. Not the comfort, not the convenience, the privilege. Because becoming who you truly are requires dismantling who you pretended to be. You lose the image of being endlessly agreeable. You lose the certainty of always being liked. You lose the illusion that peace maintained through self-erasure is real peace. And here is the blade. If you never risk disappointing others, you will permanently disappoint yourself. That is the trade. Approval in exchange for presence. Belonging in exchange for identity. You cannot keep both at the same intensity. At some point, you have to decide which absence you can tolerate more, their discomfort or your own. This is not about rebellion. It is about congruence. It is about aligning your internal experience with your external behavior. It is about no longer laughing when something is not funny, no longer agreeing when something feels wrong, no longer staying silent to maintain an image. You will not become aggressive. You will not become selfish beyond measure. You will become whole, and wholeness feels disruptive to systems that benefited from your fragmentation. If this tension feels familiar, if you recognize yourself in these quiet negotiations you make every day, then you already know this is not theoretical. This is structural. And if you are willing to examine these patterns without softening them, without romanticizing them, then stay. Not for comfort, for clarity. Staying means accepting something uncomfortable. Identity is not neutral. It rearranges relationships. For years, you were rewarded for being mature, for being balanced, for being understanding. Those words sound like virtues, but virtues become cages when they are no longer choices. When mature means you never get to break. When balanced means you never get to feel rage. When understanding means you always excuse what hurts you. The praise becomes a contract, and contracts come with expectations. If you are the calm one, you cannot explode. If you are the strong one, you cannot collapse. If you are the reasonable one, you cannot demand. So you protect the image, even when the image suffocates you. Have you noticed how people react when you stop playing your assigned role? The friend who used to vent for hours becomes uncomfortable when you say, "I don't have the energy for this today." The partner who relied on your flexibility calls you distant when you insist on your own preference. The family that admired your composure labels you sensitive when you finally show hurt. The system pushes back, not violently, but persistently, because your adaptation made you predictable, and predictability makes others feel secure. When you reclaim disowned parts, you introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people uneasy. You will feel the temptation to retreat, to smooth it over, to clarify that you are not that different, to reassure them that you are still the same. But you are not the same. You are less compliant, less filtered, less invisible. And that shift changes the hierarchy. If you stop absorbing tension, someone else has to hold it. If you stop mediating conflict, others must confront each other directly. If you stop being endlessly available, someone else must tolerate their own discomfort. Identity is a redistribution of emotional labor. And that redistribution exposes who benefited from your self-suppression. This is where the risk becomes clear. You may lose certain dynamics, certain closeness, certain versions of connection. But ask yourself something harder. Were they connected to you or to your compliance? Because there is a difference. And that difference defines whether what you had was intimacy or arrangement. Becoming visible does not guarantee applause. It guarantees friction. But invisibility guarantees erosion. You decide which cost you are willing to carry. There is a quiet grief in realizing how long you have been performing, not because you were foolish, but because you were strategic. You survived by adapting. You maintained connection by minimizing disruption. You stayed needed by staying manageable. And now you see the structure. That realization is not comforting, it is destabilizing. Because if the version of you that kept everything stable was partly constructed, then who are you without the construction? Integration is not a personality upgrade, it is a death. The death of the overly agreeable one, the death of the endlessly strong one, the death of the version that never asked for too much. And death, even symbolic, carries fear. You may fear becoming alone, too intense, too difficult, too much. But there is something more dangerous than being too much. Being absent from your own life. You can maintain harmony and slowly disappear. Or you can risk tension and slowly emerge. This is not about dramatic transformation. It is about small refusals. Refusing to laugh when it hurts. Refusing to say yes when your body says no. Refusing to edit yourself mid-sentence. Each refusal is a retrieval. A piece of you returning. Carl Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For years, your adaptations felt like personality. Now you see they were strategies. And strategies can be renegotiated, but only if you are willing to tolerate the instability that follows. There is no applause at this stage, only responsibility. Responsibility for the parts you buried, responsibility for the patterns you repeated, responsibility for the silence you maintained. You are not guilty for adapting, but you are responsible for continuing. Somewhere in this process, you may realize that the exhaustion you felt was not from doing too much. It was from not being, not fully, not honestly, not visibly. There is a book called The Forgotten Agreement by Luciana Santos that speaks about the silent contracts we make to remain accepted, not the loud promises, the invisible ones. The agreements where we trade authenticity for belonging without noticing. You may recognize yourself in that, or you may already feel the contract loosening. Either way, the question remains. If you stopped performing tomorrow, if you stopped adjusting your tone, your posture, your preferences, if you allowed the inconvenient parts to stand beside the agreeable ones, who would you be? And more importantly, who would stay? That is not a rhetorical question. It is an existential one, because maybe the real risk was never becoming too much. Maybe the real risk was disappearing so quietly that even you stopped looking for yourself.